Honkai Star Rail's 1.2 update is insane. If you haven't heard already, Honkai Star Rail patch 1.2 is just around the corner and there's an infinite amount of content being added. But before we start, collect your free Primo Gems using the codes here, and let's begin. Blade is the first new character we're being introduced to, and his kit is perfect for those looking to finally make use of their millions of Eagle sets. The Wind or Eagle Relic set has been touted as one of Star Rail's most versatile sets, with Musketeer as its partner in crime. All of this can be shaken up, however, but that's for later in the patch. Back to Blade, his kit is very interesting since he shares a similar premise to Arlen, but with more flexibility and AoE. From what we've been shown in the 1.2 trailer, Blade sacrifices a small chunk of health in order to enhance his basic skill, which then becomes AoE and deals additional damage. Now, while the concept of losing health for damage is extremely reminiscent of Arlen, and many are quick to dismiss the value considering you're at low health, Blade is different. Here's why. After being attacked, Blade gains a charge which can be stacked up to a maximum of 5. When reaching max stacks, Blade unleashes an AoE follow-up attack that heals him, so being at low HP is a blessing damage-wise, and he also has a way to prevent himself from being too low and dying before he can deal out damage. An additional feature of his kit is his ultimate setting his health to 50% and dealing massive single target damage while also hitting adjacent enemies. What does this all mean? Blade has a ridiculous amount of sustain while being rewarded for staying at low health. The difference between himself and Arlen will ultimately depend on the damage multipliers that Blade is released with, but as it stands, Arlen has very few ways to compete with Blade even despite him being a 4-star. Enough talk about Arlen though, this is a Blade analysis. Regarding Blade's best teams, it should be no surprise that pairing him with buffers like Yukong, Tingyun, and Bronya will see the highest value in return. Of course, with Blade now being a wind element, you could run a mono wind team featuring Bronya, Dan Heng, and Silverwolf to activate the weakness break, but this is dependent on the content you're bringing him to. An interesting concept that was tried in early Honkai Star Rail was building a destruction character like Clara as a glass cannon and providing her with enough support to maximize DPS. However, as the memory chaos effect changed and people realized that this was more of a silly for fun build as opposed to realistic or ideal, they started using her as a tank. While with 1.2's introduction of Blade, the return to protect the solo DPS is certainly possible when pairing Blade and shielders. In theory, running Blade with healers would be counterintuitive with his low health scaling, but being able to take preservation characters to simply shield and take aggro away from him would be very powerful. Not to continuously compare him to his peers, but a lot of the other destruction characters have clear weaknesses when it comes to practicality. Clara, for instance, feels weaker when you consider her damage is entirely based off of enemy hits. Now, while provoking enemies to Clara is straightforward when pairing her with March, a big concern with her damage also lies in the number of enemies that are alive to hit her. An extremely common scenario that happens is with her eliminating all but a singular tough enemy, and then a lot of stalling from Clara to pray that she gets hit. Again, Clara can do insane amounts of value depending on the fight, but being stalled and constantly needing several enemies to truly shine is where her flaws begin. Enough about Blade though, and on to my wife, the light of my world, Kafka. If her looks weren't enough to convince you that she's worth it, her kit definitely will. Not much was specifically shown regarding her damage through a small gameplay showcase, but a few important details already indicate how powerful she's going to be. The first is that she pairs extremely well with damage over time debuffs and deals additional damage if an enemy already has one. As the Owl and Kafka Chibi also mention, Kafka's skill don't override or replace any dots, so pairing the two allows for an insane amount of total damage to be dished out. Now, while her affinity for damage over time is well and good, she also flourishes literally any time an ally attacks. When this occurs, Kafka provides a follow-up attack. Okay, admittedly, a single target follow-up attack may not shatter all of reality, but additional damage when someone attacks is just free value. What's not to love? And finally, her most flashy and beloved ultimate has a chance to shock enemies and deals additional damage to those already shocked. If I'm speaking gibberish right now, I apologize because I might be a bit starstruck from watching my waifu on screen for the better part of 40 minutes, but long story short, Kafka plays off of debuffed enemies extremely well, and based on her kit, you will gain the most value from a debuff-based team that includes yourself, Sampo, Luca, Serval, and a Flex 4th. Obviously, the fight will determine which debuffer to take, but given how reliant her kit is on debuffs, expect 2, even 3 debuffers to make an appearance. That being said, she is human, so if you need Luocha, Japard, or other sustained characters to stay alive, slot them in. Side note, the debuffs from break effects do also benefit Kafka's kit, so it really is just Kafka's world, and we're all just living in it. Now, you might have heard me mention Luca as a potential partner to Kafka, and I'm genuinely surprised that they made him a nihility character. Him being physical makes sense since he's, well, you know. But the core of his gameplay revolves around applying his bleed and enhancing his basic attack. Hitting an enemy that has bleed increases total damage dealt, so making sure he or others can apply this debuff is critical. This is reinforced tenfold when moving along to his ultimate, which deals damage and applies a debuff that increases damage taken. It would make sense to dive deeper into his kit, but ultimately this is a similar case of the does he do damage and We will find out when he gets released. One extremely positive sign of his potential, however, is the fact that he's physical. And as with characters like Clara and Sushang, being able to apply bleed is extremely valuable given its HP percent scaling. I don't know about you guys, but seeing how insane the health bars are in Memory of Chaos really makes me glad physical scales that way. Long story short, he looks really good as a paired DPS alongside Kafka since he acts as a damage source and amplifier to your team. And given the synergy between Mommy and debuffers, Luca is a perfect candidate to be on her team. That being said, his kit does add a lot by itself, and future teams that want damage increases will definitely take him for his ultimate alone. When the livestream first started, I will admit that I had expected the new characters, but I had no idea that they were going to give us so much more. The first thing they announced was the continuation of the main story, which is great because last time I checked, I'm still waiting for Kafka to tie me up. Alongside this is the addition of 2 new areas followed by several events, a weekly boss, new sets. There's a lot of new stuff. Exciting. The new areas have new enemies who look aggressive, scary, and then there's Yanqing. We don't know exactly what they do, which is great because being surprised on the first day and realizing that the enemies are OP is funny, but nonetheless, the enemies being stronger just means that the new sets we will get will be even more enjoyable to use. Speaking of sets, the newly added 4 are all pretty crazy. Each set has their own perks, of course, but having a pure speed set relic 4-piece is just ridiculous. If you recall, Musketeer of Wild Weed is one of the most widely used sets because of its flexibility, giving speed and attack. However, depending on the speed given with the set, Messenger traversing hackerspace will take the throne, especially when it comes to support characters. The speed increase for all allies is ridiculous, and speed percent on any character is already valuable. But there are 2 things that will stop you from building this on every character, and that's whether you can apply the passive of the set and the fact that you can't stack it. Let me be clear, having a character on Eagle and a character on Messenger will definitely be ideal when using 2 supports, but once we find out how much speed we'll gain from the new set, we can decide on its true potential. On the other hand, Longevous Disciple, increasing max HP and crit rate, is an interesting yet perplexing set since the only character who comes to mind that can utilize it is Clara. However, if Blade ends up scaling decently with HP, this new relic set can also see value given the game plan of losing health. The new Redolent Arena Planar set and Broken Keel both appear to have value since they increase crit rate, increase overall damage to your team, etc. But like the other sets, they are promising at the very minimum, but are unable to be accurately assessed until we have their actual values. Regardless, farming for Redolent Arena will definitely give value to Blade enjoyers since his kit revolves around his skill and basic attack. Alongside the new sets is a handful of new events that mix puzzle and combat, which is always a nice gesture to those who want to big brain and big damage. Memory of Chaos is gaining a new mode for you to clear and gain rewards from, and if everything else I've mentioned thus far hasn't convinced you that this patch is jam-packed with things to do, for 10 minutes each of course, we're getting an additional free 10 pull with the Gift of Odyssey. Content that isn't for you, but for me, includes a companion mission involving my wife and for the new Fox Overlord, and all in all guys, this patch has new content, new fights, new sets, new simulated universe, new everything to farm, and more reason to stare at Kafka. But that's gonna be it for this video though guys. I hope you enjoyed this look at patch 1.2. I know I'm gonna have to farm forever for a decent set of debuff gear. If you enjoyed today's video, I'd appreciate it if you could like, turn on the notification bell, subscribe, let me know what you think of patch 1.2 and the future of Honkai Star Rail. Have a good one guys, see you next time, bye bye.